run the library. This is an event that's become near and dear to my heart each year. I've always loved reading, and the ability to escape into a novel, it's just a favorite pastime and always has been. So we are now at our third year of Law Reads. We started out with a perennial favorite, To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not sure how Andrew arranged this, but he managed to have the announcement of Go Set a Watchman on that same night. And then our second year, we had a novel. We selected a novel that we thought was most appropriate for an election year. That was All the President's Men. And again, we had a stellar panel to discuss election law in the media and the events surrounding Watergate. So this year's selection is slightly different, and I will admit it's influenced by my particular fondness for an author, as well as the fact that there's a story in today's work, Great Mountain, that's set in our own backyard. It's set in southwestern Virginia, and it has ties to something near and dear to all of our hearts, coal mining, and more particularly the work that's done in our own Black Lung Clinic. If I go back in time, I can still recall one book that just had a significant impact on me. And it's amazing. I can still recall with amazing specificity reading the first part of that book. I just finished a corporate tax exam on tax implications for corporate reorgs. Trust me, I was ready for anything other than the Internal Revenue Code at that point. And on my way home from law school, I stopped at my favorite independent bookstore. I picked up a book that just caught my eye. I had heard of the author, really wasn't familiar with the author at that point in time, but I thought, okay, heard good things, let me take a chance. Went home, got some food, settled down, started reading. Within 3 minutes, I had tears running down my face. Dead shock. I thought, what in the world have I bought? What is this story? I almost put the book down and walked away, but that's not something I do. So I persevered, and I finished the chapter, and I stopped. I thought, can I continue to read this book? It was a horrifying story, but the author was telling that story in a way that was so powerful, so gripping, that I completed that book in the wee hours of the morning. That story was about the gang rape of a child, and many of you may know that story. It was A Time to Kill by John Grisham. And if you haven't read A Time to Kill, if you've only seen the movie, I really recommend you go back and read it, because those first chapters are just so incredibly gripping. And for me, I was hooked not only on the book, like I said, I finished it that night, but also on the author. And of course, Grisham is the author of our story tonight. In 2014, Brian Garner, some of you may remember him. He's our editor of the Black's Law Dictionary. He also writes columns for the ABA Law Journal. He did a piece in which he advocated that we would all be better people, better lawyers, and better advocates and better writers if we simply would read more. And by that, he means read for pleasure. So his admonition in that column was that we go out, we read newspapers, we read magazines, and that we read literature. I'd like to pick up on his admonition and echo it. Read for the joy of escaping. Read for the joy of moving to a different time, a different country. Read for adventure. Read something that's not legal. I know well that when you're in law school, there's a lot of competition for your time. And I'm going to predict that it's not going to get better when you leave us and you go out and practice. So my challenge to you tonight is that you make the time, that you go out and read. And I'm going to also pick up on one more thing that Garner has come out and suggested. Try audiobooks. When you're at the gym, when you're walking, when you're traveling, you can still get some of that same joy from just listening. So with that challenge in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelist. We are missing Jill Fraley. She was unexpectedly called away. But we are very honored to have Mary Cromer and Tim MacDonnell with us. Mary is a 2006 graduate of W&L Law, and since 2008, she's worked as a staff attorney at the Appalachian Citizens Law Center, which is a small nonprofit law firm based in Whitesboro, Kentucky, and it's dedicated to protecting coalfield communities and the environment from destructive coal mining practices in central Appalachia. Her firm works with both national environmental groups as well as local coal miners and their families in a range of often sensitive environmental and public health issues that all stem to coal mining. In her time with the ACLC, she has litigated a variety of cases for representing families who've lost their well water supplies, principally due to the local coal mining industry, to fighting pollution in the coal mining industry under national environmental laws. She's published professional and scholarly works on the aspects of the Clean Water Act and environmental law. Those works have appeared in the Clearinghouse Review, the Virginia Lawyer, and the Environmental Law News. She's also developed and taught an undergraduate course in environmental law at UVA's Wise College in Western Virginia, and she's previously served as an associate with the Southern Environmental Law Center in Charlottesville. Her work there focused on the Clean Water Act enforcement and litigation. Immediately after law school, she clerked for the Western District of Virginia for the Honorable Glenn Conrad. While she was here at W&L, she was also a student attorney for the Black Lung Clinic, and editor of the Law Review, and president of the Environmental Law Society. She has received her BA from UVA, and she's a native of Pound, Virginia, which is on the Virginia-Kentucky border. So we welcome Mary. And then we have our own Tim MacDonnell. Tim is the clinical professor of law and director of the Advanced Administrative Litigation Clinic. That's what we call the Black Lung Clinic. In his role, he trains and supervises students in working with representation of coal miners and their survivors pursuing benefits under the Black Lung Law. The clinic has represented hundreds of clients since 1996 and has a high success rate in securing those benefits for their clients. He also teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, investigation, and evidence here at the law school, and he researches and writes in those areas. His scholarly work has been published in the NYU Journal of Law and Liberty, the Virginia Journal of Criminal Law, the University of Memphis Law Review, and our own W&L Law Review. Prior to joining our faculty, he served as an attorney with the Judge Advocate General's Court. He held the rank of a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and he, during his military career, provided services as trial counsel in South Korea, criminal administrative law practice at Fort Eustis here in Virginia. He was a professor at the Army JAG School in Charlottesville and a legal advisor to the Iraqi High Tribunal in Baghdad in Iraq. He's an active member of the Massachusetts and Virginia State Bars. He has his bachelor degree with honors from the University of Massachusetts, his JD with honors from Suffolk University, and LLM degrees from the Army School, the JAG School, as well as UVA. So with that, I want to turn the program over to our own Andrew Christensen, who is our Faculty and Instructional Services Librarian, and our two panelists.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I want to give a special acknowledgement to Wendy Lovell of the Shepherd program for getting word out about this event on the front campus, and also for hosting Mary a little bit earlier this afternoon to speak to undergraduate students as part of the W&L Shepherd program, and that for the interdisciplinary study of poverty and human capability, and that's dedicated to service and increased opportunities in disadvantaged communities, including the Appalachian coal country that we'll be discussing tonight. And we're happy to have some of those undergraduates with us tonight, I understand, along with our own law students, faculty, staff, and other community members. And of course, we're thankful to our panelists Mary Cromer and Tim MacDonnell, who have a wealth of insights on the legal, environmental, health, and industrial aspects of coal mining as depicted in Gray Mountain, and also personal experience and views that I'm sure that they will share with us tonight. For the format this evening, we'll have each panelist speak for about 15 minutes about their perspectives on the book and any of the real-world issues that were the basis of the events portrayed by John Grisham. Also a bit about their backgrounds in the related legal practice areas like environmental law and black lung, and their passion for providing public service to Appalachia and its people through the law, and anything else they'd like to discuss. We'll start with Mary and then move to Tim, and after Professor MacDonnell's comments, which might wrap up around about 5:45, we'll open up to the audience for questions and comments, either about the book or something specifically directed at the panelists, and I'll moderate those by calling on folks. And then we'll try to conclude as close to 6 o'clock as possible. And with all that said, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Ms. Mary Cromer. Mary.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, Carolyn. I'm really happy to be here. As Carolyn said, I graduated in 2006, and I was a part of the Black Lung Clinic when I was here. I am originally from Pound, Virginia, which is where I live now. It's right on the Virginia-Kentucky border, and I work for an organization called Appalachian Citizens Law Center, which was founded in 2001. We do black lung mine safety and environmental work related to coal mining. That work is changing, has been changing pretty rapidly over the last couple of years, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I wanted to say, first, the reason I am doing what I'm doing is that I grew up around mining, and there are a lot of inherent structural problems and injustices that occur around coal mining, essentially. I think Grisham portrays it as a David versus Goliath story, and it really often is. And so when I was growing up on my family's farm, which has been in my family for 150 years, a mining company went in and undermined our farm and basically sunk 5 springs and 3 water wells within the course of a month. And so we went from having our own water supply to having no water. And the mining progressed, it was about 300 feet below the surface, or actually no, 500 feet below the surface. And it progressed for several miles and basically took out water supplies as it went. And that's not a very uncommon story. What really struck me as I matured was the fact that the response to it was the companies, and this was a precursor to Alpha, so it was a really large mining company even at the time. The answer was that they brought in buffalo tanks of water. So everyone in our community has these white plastic tanks of water sitting in our yards, and this was the answer for nearly 15 years until the Red Onion State Prison was built, and that became our community's water supply. The attitude of my family and most of the people I knew was, well, they're bringing us water and this is coal and there's not a lot that you can do about it. I mean, now I understand that they had a legal requirement under the Surface Mining Act to replace the water supply, which they were doing, but the thought of anyone suing them to require them to do it, it just wasn't going to happen. So I did sort of come to a certain bias naturally, or from things that happened as I grew up. And I also, during the time when I was in college, is when mountaintop removal really took off, and there was several mountaintop removal operations near my family's land. And so over the course of the 4 years that I was in college, I saw the mountains around me taken down and leveled, and a lot of just harms, not as much the harms that I sort of have focused on in my career, which is conductivity in water and stream health and things like that, as the psychological harm that it was doing to my family and the community around us. So that's my background, and that's that I came to law school with all of that, and I came to law school hoping to be able to return to the area where I'm from, and and represent the little guy. So I am very fortunate that I've been able to do that. I think we were just talking before this started about the sort of portrayal in Gray Mountain of good versus evil, and I think that there is sort of a shorthand that is used of David versus Goliath, or good versus evil, that is very simplifying and doesn't really represent the nuances in a lot of situations. And I have dealt with companies and I've dealt with opposing counsel who are trying to do the right thing and trying to figure out how they can make a profit and not destroy people's homes and livelihoods. But that's not always the case. I think I've also dealt with situations where companies are just clearly trying to flout the law and expecting to be able to get away with it because this is Central Appalachia and no one's looking. So I think there is kind of a range of that. Talking a little more about the specific work that I have done, I represent both individuals and community groups. And so individual cases will be often cases where there's not enough money in the damage that's done for the private bar to be interested in it. And so that's one of the things that nonprofit law, like the organization I work for, is really important to be able to fill that niche, because otherwise situations like people who have homes of very little value, relatively $30,000 to $40,000, who live near a mining operation may have significant impacts from the mining because of blasting, for instance, or because of water well damage. But because you have that cap of the value of their home, there's no private bar, there's no representation from the private bar. So it's very helpful and very important that there are organizations like the organization I work for, like John Grisham's legal aid organization, that are there to step in and give representation to those people, because it's not just that those individuals need representation. There's a more systemic problem when, over the course of time, companies realize that they can do damage on that scale, and there's not going to be any repercussion because there's no representation from the bar. So I think one of the things I really liked about the book is I think he focuses in on the importance of legal aid. In that case it was legal aid, but nonprofit representation, and what that means for folks who are disadvantaged. And I think when you're talking about this type of situation that can often be a David versus Goliath situation, you've got to have that. And I'm a little impassioned about this right now because there is talk of defunding legal aid at the federal level, and so I think that could be very bad for a lot of especially low-income communities. As far as the impacts from mining operations, I mentioned blasting and water well damage. In the book, there is the case where the two brothers were killed by a boulder. Something very similar to that did happen in Appalachian, Virginia. There was a rock that came off of a mining, actually road, but a mining site, and rolled down the mountain into a home at night and killed a 2-year-old. I had a case when I first started in 2009. I'd just been there for a few months, and I got a call. I'll just tell this story anecdotally because I think it really, there are a number of pieces in this that are interesting to me, at least. There was a family in eastern Kentucky who both were, it was a couple, they had 2 daughters who were no longer living in the home, a couple living in a trailer. Both were deaf and mute. And there was a large mining operation on the mountain above them. They set off buzzers to warn when the blast is coming, but of course these folks couldn't hear the buzzers. The blast loosed a rock literally larger than my car. I drive a Honda Fit, so it's a small car, but still the rock was literally larger than my car. Came down the mountain and plowed through 2 rooms of their house, just completely destroyed their trailer. I got a call the next day from a member of the private bar who has a pretty good, used to be a state representative, has a pretty good reputation for being a very aggressive tort lawyer. And he had immediately arrived on the scene. And I credit this guy so much because he called me and he said, this needs to be handled by someone who isn't interested in the money. These people are on SSI. They are likely, if they get a large award, to lose those SSI benefits. Essentially, they have a social worker who manages their money, and an award of a substantial amount of money could be quite devastating to their lives. I think he was absolutely right. And so basically he said, will you take over this case? And I did. We didn't file anything. And this is a case of, there are two sides to this. I think the media coverage, it was pretty immediate. So the company immediately wanted to settle, and basically were just asking me what it would take. And so we were able to negotiate a pretty quick settlement. But my job in that, and I sort of want to stress this because lawyers' work is not always what it's portrayed in books and movies. What I did essentially for the next month was spend a good part of my time working with this couple and their caseworker, looking at, they basically had to buy a new trailer and get electricity hooked up, get their sewage taken care of, all of those basic things. I basically did kind of social work for a month, trying to just figure out what it would take to get them back to where they were so that they were no longer having to live in a motel, which is where the company had put them up in the meantime. So that the woman was having anxiety attacks and actually had been hospitalized at one point for her anxiety attacks, so that they were able to just get back as much of their life as possible, as quickly as possible. So, it really wasn't legal work. It was basically just coming up with what needed to happen, calling all the people to, get arranged for different things, to make sure that they were back in a home within a month and could just go on with their lives. And then basically I took an amount, I put my fees in there, but basically gave an invoice to the company and said, fine, we'll pay it. And that was it. It was done. And so I tell that sort of anecdotally, but mainly because that's not what you think of lawyers doing. But I think this guy who was a private lawyer understood that this was, if there was, and it's sort of interesting because at that point Kentucky had no punitive damages unless there was actual physical injury, but clearly if there was ever a case that would overturn that law, it was that. And that law was overturned the next year. But this guy, he's a very good trial lawyer, very well known, and he said that to me. He said, basically, this is the case that I can get that stupid law overturned on, but I don't want to do it. So I sort of wanted to tell that story partly to say what my role was in it, and also to say that, the company knew it had to do the right thing. It did the right thing as quickly as possible, and the private lawyer in that case knew what the right thing was, and it was for him to not try to make as much money as possible. So it's not always about making as much money as you can. I guess as far as bad actors go, I will say there's one case that I've had that I think, in my mind, clearly involved bad actors who were relying on the state to not be paying attention or enforcing the law. And that was a Clean Water Act case where my clients discovered that you have to submit, under the Clean Water Act, if you have a permit, you have to submit quarterly monitoring reports that show the amount of different pollutants that you're discharging. And so my clients discovered that two of the largest companies actually in Kentucky were submitting the same reports quarter after quarter, and had been doing this for about 5 years, and the state had just not noticed. And there were instances where the person in charge at the company that was certifying each of these records had to be signed, and he would just mark out the date and change the date and keep his signature. So just anecdotally, I think that was an instance where clearly there was fraudulent activity going on. And that company went into bankruptcy, and we ended up with some type of settlement that they agreed that neither they nor any of their owners or controllers would ever seek a mining permit in Kentucky again, and we were all sort of happy to be done with it. So I guess I'll leave it there and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I also wanted to thank Andrew and Carolyn for including me in this event. And what a fantastic notion to make sure, especially among the law students in the room or those who are looking to become law students from the undergraduate side, the idea of pleasure reading in their development as attorneys. And I think that's at least part of what Mr. Gardner is saying and what Carolyn has echoed, is that yes, pleasure reading allows you to, that moment, to pull out of reading statutes and reading case law and so forth. But what it does is it broadens you as an individual, and it makes you able to connect with other audiences more effectively. And as Justice Ginsburg just told us within the last week, being an attorney at its essence is understanding the art of persuasion. That's where the real joy is. And finding different avenues of persuasion through the narratives that are provided in books, I think, is a fantastic notion. I enjoyed Gray Mountain in a number of areas, particularly issues that it highlighted. And I would suggest one of the issues that it highlights very effectively is a crisis in coal. This is a crisis that comes from a variety of sources. Coal as an industry has been in crisis for the last 8 years. When I started in the Black Lung Clinic, every time you turned on a light in the United States, you could thank 50% of it to coal. Now you turn on a light and you can thank 33% of it from coal. So coal as a source of energy has been in a rapid decline. The reason for that is multifactorial. Despite claims that it's simply because of higher regulation, there are other market forces that are impacting coal and its effectiveness as an energy source. So you have companies that have been now struggling, massive bankruptcies among coal companies, struggling to say, okay, we need to still be making profits, because that's the nature of coal companies and corporations. That is at their essence. They're there to make money. So now there's a danger that those coal companies are going to find other ways to cut corners, to reduce the safety measures that are in place. Not long ago, we had the Upper Big Branch disaster, where you had dozens of miners killed. That was connected to the failure to engage in proper dust regulation of the mine. Part of that is because it's more challenging to engage in dust regulation. It's less cost effective. The individuals who were autopsied after the Upper Big Branch collapse had a significantly higher rate of dust-induced lung disease than what the medical literature would have suggested. And you had, among those individuals who had died, these are active coal miners, by the way, and black lung disease tends to be more significantly impacting retired coal miners because it's a latent and progressive disease. So after individuals breathe in coal dust, and they do it for 20, 30, 40 years, over time the body responds and they develop this disease. Less frequently are you seeing it in active coal miners. But that's not true anymore. Now we're seeing a significant increase in black lung disease among active coal miners, and a significant increase in the more aggressive form of black lung disease called complicated pneumoconiosis or progressive massive fibrosis. So you have this crisis in the industry. You have this, as a result, or it's not entirely clear from the medical literature, you have this significant increase in the more aggressive form of this disease. And you have these regions of the country that have been bearing the weight of coal, which are in danger of being forgotten places. So we have this danger of forgotten places and forgotten people. Because the coal industry, when it's done with a region, will just move. And it'll go to the next place to develop coal and develop energy. And the people who mine the coal are still going to be there with the dust that they breathed in. And the communities are still going to be there dealing with the remnants of these, of the process of developing coal. It's a national problem. It's not a local problem. It's not a state problem or simply a regional notion of Appalachia. It's our country's responsibility because every one of us turns a light on. Every one of us relies on the power that comes from coal. But what are we doing to either develop other forms of energy so we don't have to rely on coal and all the negative things that happen with coal? Or what are we doing for the communities that are now bearing the scars of coal development or the individuals who are bearing those scars as well? We talk a little bit about, I really enjoyed your stories, by the way.
Thank you.
Terrific anecdotal stories, and I'll share just a few. And I've been very fortunate as an attorney since I left the military to come to the Black Lung Clinic and to have amazing clients to represent. It is, I know, incredibly uncommon for a lawyer to say, I have not had a client I didn't personally like. The individuals that we get the opportunity to represent are people who've worked 20, 30, 40 years doing a job I couldn't do for a week. Working at times in environments that are, imagine, 8, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day for some, in what's called low coal. So essentially, they're working in 24 to 38 inches high, crawling all day long. And that's what they're doing as part of their job. Now, you know, there's a tendency to think, well, sure, that happened at the turn of the century. We're representing clients who did that for most of their coal mining career. Now, not all coal mining, of course, is low coal. There's other kinds of coal mining. But the physical rigor of the job seems to be consistent throughout. I mean, it is an incredibly hard job. And the people that we have the opportunity to work with and represent are people who, if they could, they would go back to that job in a heartbeat, rather than taking benefits that they have to take in order to keep their home or in order to put food on the table. So one client in particular, and I won't use his specific name, but he's an individual who always touched me. He's since passed away because he had worked as a coal miner for about 13 years, and then in a coal mining accident, he lost his right arm. And a year and a half later, he was back in the coal mine, and he worked another 23 years with the one arm. And again, the same sort of person who, when he went to the hearing, needing oxygen and needing a wheelchair from his spouse, as I said, he would go back to coal mining in a heartbeat if he could make a living doing that. Coal miners have enormous esprit de corps. Again, I served in the military for 21 years, and the only time that I've seen that kind of sense of duty and sense of connection among themselves and their community was when I was in military service among members of the Army. So they're people that need to be taken care of by our country. In the most recent election, candidate Trump, along with other regional elections, declared they were going to bring coal back. And there's a number of people who question whether that's possible in some of the regions that they declared they would bring coal back. And there's, of course, large numbers of people who would argue that coal shouldn't be brought back, that there should be alternative sources of energy. that are explored. But if the decision is made by the nation to bring coal back, then it has to be done with a recognition of what it does to those communities, to find ways to mitigate the harm that's done to those communities, and what it's doing to the individuals who bear that weight, who make it possible for us to turn the lights on. Some other issues that I found valuable and helpful in the book, as an attorney who lived through 2008, it highlights to the law students of today to recognize there was a crisis in the legal community in 2008 where what was believed to be secure and absolute and certain ground to be on was no longer that. And that attorneys had to consider remaking themselves, that they were in these, some of them in fantastic jobs that were paying extraordinary money, to all of a sudden you don't have that job anymore. And it's valuable, I think, as attorneys, but also as law students, to recognize that there's a need for first principles of lawyering, which is developing those skills to be an effective advocate, to zealously advocate for your clients. The reasons why you went to law school in the first place was because you were drawn to the art, as opposed to the money, because the money can go away, and it can be tied to something that had nothing to do with whether you were being a good lawyer at that time. The book also highlights a number of ethical issues, and it's something that as law students and new lawyers, and I think old lawyers, I hope that you realize quickly, legal ethical issues happen every single day. And when you go to some professional responsibility education, people will say things like, well, just do what's right, or just do what your mother would have you do. That's inadequate advice. Because of the role of lawyer, you have responsibilities that will sometimes draw you away from what you would say are your morals. This is where I would morally go, but this is where I legally, ethically must go somewhere else. The issues of legal ethics are an everyday event, and I found it valuable in the book that they addressed that concept. Finally, on the positive side, public perceptions of lawyers, it's a critical component for law students to be in touch with and for lawyers. And books like Mr. Grisham's book ties into that. And we need to be aware of that and understand that some members of the public are going to perceive that lawyers are like these lawyers. They're either all really good or they're all really bad people. And that's an oversimplification. And to be aware of it and to find ways to dispel it, I think becomes critical. As far as concerns go, related to the book, one of the concerns that I had was that by this simplification of the lawyers in this case being, I don't know how we'd describe it, evil. I think I had down obnoxious, arrogant, and then ultimately I underlined evil. And then the evil permeated, didn't it? We had the United States Attorney's Office, we had the FBI, we had the judges on the circuit courts, we had, I can only assume, every lawyer at the law firms that were doing these dastardly things. And it might leave a reader to think, well, if we just cleaned up those bad apples. As far as black lung goes, I would suggest the problem is a systemic problem. It's not necessarily that people, attorneys, are doing wrong or doing evil or are bad people. I've worked with the opposing counsel from Jackson Kelly, Bowles Rice, Greenberg Trord, all sort of big coal company law firms, and I had never once encountered an attorney acting unethically in my interactions with I would suggest the analogy of David and Goliath is a terrific analogy for the coal companies versus the coal miner. And in fact, I did an interview with NPR where I said it's David and Goliath, and David doesn't have a sling. The problem is one of a system that has inadequate resourcing, so that you have a coal company with all the resources available to it, able to get multiple opinions from multiple doctors, and a coal miner who's worried about whether they can make the mortgage. So they can't afford to get multiple doctors, multiple x-rays, multiple CT scans reread by experts. I'd also suggest the implication is in the book that these doctors are bought and paid for by the coal company. That there might have been a doctor who went forward with this and did it just for the money. I would suggest it's more likely the doctors were ideologues and just didn't think that coal mine dust causes this much lung disease. And they arrived at that conclusion and they're stuck. Now they're flat earthers based on essentially the science as it's evolved. And you say, no, seriously, the boat, just watch it come up over the horizon. You'll see the mast first. It's a round planet. But they evolved and they're committed to ideas that are inconsistent with the medical science. And so they believe what they're saying when they make their statements about whether this was a coal dust-induced lung disease or whether it was only cigarette smoking and so forth. The problem with casting it in this way is you don't get to the systemic problem. How do you create a system, if we believe in the adversarial process, which I do vigorously, how do we create a system where there's an equity of resources so that the truth can come out? Because the way the Black Lung Benefits Act is written, unless Congress wishes to change it, is that its intention is to ensure that deserving miners, those people who have become totally disabled due in substantial part to their work in coal mines, receive benefits. But its intention isn't that undeserving coal miners, people who got their lung disease from something totally different, get benefits. So it's an adversarial process. How do we make that adversarial process work? And it's to remove this resource inequity that results in these outcomes that are unequal and ultimately unjust. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tim. All right, I'm sure we have some questions, comments about the book, either something you heard from the panelists or your own thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
This is for mostly Mr. MacDonnell, Professor MacDonnell, but for both. Do you think that there is a way to address the current environmental issues associated with the coal mining as a means for energy, while also addressing the fact that many of the people who are most terribly affected by this process want those jobs back, because that's all they know. It's the only way to earn income in that area.
Right, and I think that I guess my short answer is I don't know the environmental issues well enough, and I would ask Mary in the environmental area for her comments. I think you hit the nail on the head when you have so many people bring back coal, and it's clearly touching them deeply in an emotional way. But it's sort of, and I don't want to diminish their feelings, but it's a little bit like working for the phone company with cable lines and saying, "Bring back my dial phone, bring back my dial phone." You're like, "No, we have these cell phones." That the question of whether you can revitalize coal, I don't know that it's been thoroughly analyzed from the question of, even in some of these places, is there any coal really left for you to get? So in West Virginia, that it's been so heavily mined for so long, what's left to go after? And part of the theory, at least, of why this more aggressive form of black lung is developing is the idea that coal mines are pursuing less rich coal deposits, which means they take more rock than coal. Rock is roughly 50 times worse for you to breathe in, rock dust, than coal dust. And so the belief is that by going after these less rich seams, more rock's being taken, so more rock dust is being breathed in by coal miners, and they're developing this more aggressive form of the disease.
And I, sort of picking on what you were just talking about in your statement that there is a crisis in coal, I think that that same problem is occurring in the environmental arena and that's really what mountaintop removal is. It's a more aggressive form of mining to get smaller and smaller seams of coal. I think the rhetoric around the war on coal and the rhetoric that there is a dichotomy or a natural that you either have jobs or you can protect your environment, but you can't have both. I think that is something that's really been used more and more by the industry. I mean, it's always been there. Don't get me wrong. I grew up there. I grew up with that kind of narrative, but it has been being used more and more by the industry as the crisis deepens, essentially, as the industry gets to its margins where the coal is almost gone and they're having to do more and more what I would call radical forms of mining to get that coal. So I don't think that there's going to be an answer. I think it's going to play itself out. I think what we're likely to see here is, and I have some anecdotal evidence to support this, I think probably there will be a bump in mining now that the EPA is likely to start allowing permits that it had stopped before. But I think all of those permits, the reason they were stopped is because they are pretty marginal. And at the same time, you have a very low demand for this coal. So I think it's just going to be a little blip. That there are some operations that are probably already planned that could be profitable given a very lax permitting environment. But after that, I think really we are for Central Appalachia, for Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, we're really at the end of it. And so as far as that narrative of coal versus the environment, I think that's when it's sort of going to play itself out. The really, really unfortunate thing is, and I've also had a couple of cases, the one I mentioned and then another one where the companies have gone into bankruptcy. We're starting to look into what's happening as the industry is pulling out, and that has been happening since 2008. The really unfortunate thing is that there's going to be a legacy of pollution that the area is going to have to deal with for a long time, and it's an area that, as you know, doesn't have a lot of capital and doesn't have a lot of ways of dealing with this pollution. So as a specific concrete example, one of the issues that I'm working on is related to what are called pre-chlorination byproducts in water supply systems. And so basically, one of the problems is that a lot of the raw water the intake water for water supplies, municipal water supplies that's coming from these rivers and creeks that are downstream of areas that have been heavily mined, that water is really poor quality. And so it has to go through a lot of treatment to basically get it to be potable water. That treatment itself can cause problems, and one of the problems is what's called pre-chlorination byproducts, which are carcinogenic, which is something that happens when chlorine that's used to, of course, to combat bacteria in water mixes with water that has a lot of sediment, a lot of stuff in it, which is what you'll find downstream of mining operations for a very long time. And so we're starting to see a lot of, or I guess become more aware of a lot of these sort of secondary problems that are going to have to be addressed if there is hope for revitalizing the economy of the area. I mean, you can't build an economy if you don't have water supplies. So I feel like I sort of went off on a tangent, and I don't know if I answered your question at all, but.
I guess I wasn't sure if there was any sort of strategy that any companies have been thinking about to try to don't know, allow that transition to new forms of energy while providing new types of jobs in those areas? Because I'm trying to imagine, how are these communities going to transition to something new? Or do you think they're just going to be without any sort of industry in those areas?
I mean, I don't think it's going to come, the answers are going to come from the coal industry, but I think that there are a number of people working on different ideas related to, for instance, having smaller electrical supplies, renewable energy supplies, located on old mining sites. And so that kind of stuff is looking more and more feasible. There was a time, I think 8 years ago, when I would have probably said that was all pie in the sky, but I think as the technology for wind is improving, the technology for solar is improving, and then there's hopefully talk about releasing some of the there's the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund that could be used to basically spur some development on old mine sites. And so there are things like that are being talked about, but it's not going to come from the industry. I mean, I think the industry is going to pull out and is going to be mining in Illinois or Wyoming or, fracking.
Where they've been going, to these other, and states that are happy to have it. They're saying, come on in.
Another question? In back to this man.
What are your thoughts on the power that an author like John Grisham has on influencing and informing the public on a complex issue like this, especially with the risk of simplification or misrepresentation?
I think it's a great, power to have. I mean, it's got to be amazing to be able to take his flashlight and say, look, there's a problem, or look, there's another problem. And it's probably unfair for me doing black lung for 8 years to say, well, you didn't quite get it right, Mr. Grisham. He's like, okay, because I've never done a black lung case, so maybe that explains why I didn't get it exactly right. But I think that the question, I suppose my critique was more a concern that there's a danger that in the process of making it interesting and engaging and make people read it really fast as a page turner, that occasionally you can lose important nuance and aspects that someone who was a coal attorney would throw the book into the wall and curse it because they said, well, what they don't mention in this is that as soon as a coal miner wins at the first level, they start getting paid. They start getting paid the benefits. The implication of the book is, well, you're not going to get paid until this case is played all the way out 10, 12 years from now. Well, that's not true. Coal miners, when they win at the district director level, they start getting monthly payment. Now, that doesn't mean that they're thrilled with it, because that means that money could be taken away. And that there are complexities about how black lung litigation is done that's different from regular civil litigation that explains some of these, what feels really unfair. So in the book they talk about this idea about multiple pathology reports, and they had 2 that were clearly showed he had the disease and 1 that didn't, and they only submitted the 1 that they didn't. The coal company argument would be, we're only allowed to submit 1. And we're attorneys for the coal company, so why would we submit our one shot at submitting a pathology report? Why would we submit the one that said it's the disease that we're trying to argue it isn't? And also the counterpoint would be, I had 3 medical experts, 2 said they thought it was the disease, 1 said that it wasn't, i.e. it's not certain whether the person had the disease or not. That would be, I think, the position, and that's the potential nuance that gets lost when it's written as if they knew absolutely for sure that they had it. It was like a blood test, and they knew for sure based on the blood test. Not so, but I think it's great to have that power.
And I'm less troubled by the nuance, I will say. I think that he did a very good job of giving the broad brush outlines of a problem that in a way that was accessible to people who had probably never thought about this and never, may or may not really have known before that there was such a thing as black lung. And we've had a lot of, I will say, I'm very grateful personally to Grisham for this book because we've gotten a lot of support for ACLC based on this book, and we get calls from people all over the country, even now still. And actually, there was a little uptick after NPR did an investigative story on black lung recently, and we had several calls from people who said, we had no idea that this was an important issue still. We thought, coal mining was dead, and but for having read Gray Mountain, we wouldn't have paid any attention to this story. So I feel like the good outweighs the bad, I guess, and it's absolutely true that there's a lot of nuance that's lost. But.
Well, and I guess one of the things that we thought coal was dead. Did you? I keep going to the. Did you turn your light on? Did you turn the TV on? You may wish it was dead. You may recognize the problems with it, but we as a nation need to address the issue, and that's this deals with a part of it, which is again terrific.
Well, flurry of questions here at the end. Yes, Professor Massey.
Mary, I'm wondering, how did you happen to get hooked up with John Grisham?
Just what I was going to ask. I was hoping someone was going to
ask. To serve as
I was curious.
advisor on this.
It was a wonderful honor. I'm so glad I was able to do it. He is a friend of Rick Middleton, who is the director of SELC in Charlottesville. So he was talking to Rick about mining issues, and Rick sent him to me. So I'm very grateful for that.
And I assume you had to meet him in person. Did he come to visit your
did.
office?
He came to Whitesburg, and here's my little story. He came in his really lovely Lexus Roadster, which was a gorgeous car, and I was so excited. I was like, yeah, we're going to go look at mine sites. And he was like, let's take your car. As I mentioned, I have a Honda Fit. He's a big guy. I tend to have recycling and stuff. It was great. He was really a wonderful person to talk to, and really easygoing and down to earth. So.
Wonderful. And I will point out that you actually are acknowledged in the back of the book. When I was looking, we had selected the book first, and I had looked through, and I was kind of thinking, okay, and I happened to come across the back, and I saw your name, and I was like, okay, well, let me see. And I Googled you up, and I saw that she was actually an alum. I did not know that ahead of time. So when I was reaching out, I reached out, and then the rest was history. So actually acknowledged in the book there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Yeah, yes, please.
I have a comment in the form of a poem. I'd like to read. It's about a minute long. In gratitude for everyone's presence here. And it's called Mountain Mama Wasted. I remember Appalachia's mothery soft ocean of mauvey pink mountains, flowing on and on beyond horizon after horizon, hopeful, undulating waves, corduroy wide ridges, vast expanse, leafless and laced by maidenhair woods, ancient and wise, pubescent, resting mounds, voluptuous, wintry with spring's promise, dipped at the edges to hollow volvic depths, vulnerable, rosy cheek shapes, bucolic and suddenly blushed by screeching violence, Mother Nature rape, shame, pristine peaks sliced hastily, heedlessly and needlessly by reckless, rapacious greedmongers, salivating, mesectifying, spitting filth and putridity, scalping for lumber, for coal, injecting chemical glut into rivery, ribbony veins, addicted, gutting into her fertile loins, devouring her tenderness, demolishing, devastating, destroying the almost heaven West Virginia I remember.
So you're a West Virginia native, I assume? Do you have an affiliation with the W&L community? Are you on the faculty? Are you an alum? Or?
Oh, my dad's been here, and I'm here auditing now.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing with us. All right. It is a little bit after 6, but if people can have to go, that's fine, of course. But I do want to maybe entertain one, two, maybe more brief questions. Yes, Tom.
I really appreciated the part of the book where there was some vigilante justice playing out. There was some sort of they labeled them eco-terrorists attacking the construction equipment. I wanted to know if that's a real thing that's happening in Appalachia. I know that it's a real thing nationwide, but I'm just wondering
how you sign up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Where do I sign up? No, I was just wondering if that's happening.
Not recently, to my knowledge. I mean, there was some of that, probably 2007 to 2010. I'm not aware of any of those actions in recent time.
What was the spur for why was it prominent in 2007, 2010?
There was a lot more mountaintop removal and organizing around mountaintop removal in those years, and as the industry started declining for a number of reasons pretty rapidly in 2010, that those movements sort of lessened.
You know, and that industry decline also raises questions about bankruptcy and the mechanisms by which corporations are able to essentially, you know, get as much as they can out of it, and then declare bankruptcy and cut themselves away from the responsibilities that would be associated with the cleanup or associated with continuing to pay miners their pensions or anything else, and yet then another company moves in and takes over the operation. Again, bankruptcy is well outside of my zone, but it's been consistent as a crisis. That the bankruptcies in coal have just been massive.
All right, this will be the last question. All right, yes, ma'am.
For Ms. Cromer, how did you figure out when you got the financial settlement for the new and deaf couple? Mm-hmm. How did you figure out to get the money without it affecting their Social Security?
I got an opinion from the Social Security office, so there is a way that you can, and this has been several years, so I don't remember the exact details, but basically submit documentation to show that it was a make-whole remedy rather than any kind of ongoing financial benefit to the individual who is receiving SSI, so that it would not affect their SSI. So I was able to get that opinion from Social Security, and it didn't affect their SSI. But that was the real concern. I don't know if that so these people basically have income solely from disability, from SSI, and the concern is that if you have any kind of lump sum payment, that disqualifies you, that would disqualify them for their SSI, and so that's what we were working on.
All right. Well, join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Appreciation from Washington and Lee, which I'll spoil the suspense here. These are bookmarks. Washington and Lee special bookmarks. So again, thanks to our panelists. Oh, and for everyone else, if you have not already gotten your own copy, these are complimentary copies of John Grisham's book, Gray Mountain, which are courtesy of the Law Library. And thanks to all my colleagues in the Law Library, of course, for all their help in making this evening possible. And I hope everyone has a good evening. All right, thank you so much.